Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. Sunday the 13th of August. Just getting ready for the Sunday morning broadcast, but I think we're going to do the Minefield and give up entirely on the roundtable discussion because Tom Switzer is a right-wing ideologue and I can't stand listening to him. And while waiting, the Choughs have found a snake to tell me about. I am being called. See, a Redbelly-Black Snake. It's okay, leave it alone, I don't want to eat it. Yes, I know. It was a cold night and the snake's getting warm in the sun. Yeah, thank you for telling me. But no, I don't want to eat the snake. And you find it interesting to know about it too, don't you? Good little snake. You're okay, aren't you? Very little tiny snake too.
Hope you're comfortable as you listen to the Minefield. Welcome back to the show, or welcome to the show for the first time, if indeed this is the first time you've encountered us. Sorry for what you're about to experience. Comfort is something that I want to talk about today because I feel like it's become a bit of a theme in our public discourse, particularly our politics, and I wonder if it should be there. And for that reason, I've made my co-host Scott Stevens, Waleed Ali is my name, my co-host Scott Stevens, I've made him decidedly uncomfortable. I'm making him do a topic that wasn't in his mind until I said we must do it today. But it's not out of nowhere, Scott. We have a reason for dragging the concept of comfort into our moral and ethical deliberations.
Yes, we do. And may I just point out to you, my dear friend, that it didn't really take much persuading. I mean, this was the easiest sell ever in terms of doing this topic. This is something I've been concerned about for a long time, and what better time to look at it than this week. Look, I should say, Willie, there are some coincidences that we come across in modern life that really are a bit too delicious to pass up. And how's this for a coincidence? So this week, and this is why we're talking about comfort, this week is Homelessness Week. This is supposed to be a time when we turn our hearts, our minds, our attentions to the experience of those who find themselves without stable or safe housing. And hopefully, and this is part of, I think, the design hopefully is to puncture some of those stereotypes that often surround those who sleep and live rough. And it's also hopefully to provoke in our minds and the minds of lawmakers some truly constructive and humane ways of addressing the persistence of homelessness in a time of widening inequality. And yet, this week, of all weeks, New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian has introduced legislation that gives her government the power to dismantle and evacuate the tent city that's grown up at Martin Place in the Sydney CBD. Legislation that targets people and objects that is deemed, this is what she said last night, quote, unacceptable impacts on the public. Now look, buddy, I don't know where you sit with this. I'm a bit of a grammar Nazi.
Yes, so I was wondering about that.
The word, and I mean, look, if there was any...
I'm just going to go chasing a different station with less static.
And indeed, impact, especially when used as a verb or used as an impersonal noun to describe people. Anyway,
yeah. But you know what?
It's grotesque.
By way of right post, might I say, if I were to launch a crusade, it would be against the casual use of the word crusade, buddy. So just back off.
So anyway, this measure to deal in an enforcement fashion, to deal coercively, in fact, with those there at the tent city, this has been resisted for weeks by Sydney Lord Mayor Clover Moore.
I think the talk about clearing out Martin Place and throwing people in the back of trucks was really, really scary for those vulnerable homeless people in Martin Place. And I think that's not what we're about as Sydney citizens.
That was Sydney Lord Mayor Clover Moore. But the New South Wales Premier is hardly unusual in adopting such enforcement-based measures. Earlier this year, for instance, Victoria sought to criminalise homelessness itself in an effort to reduce its visibility in the Melbourne CBD. The underlying assumption behind this desire to criminalise homelessness was put, I would say, quite bluntly and even a bit troublingly by Chief Commissioner Victoria Police Graham Ashton.
It's very ugly, it's unsightly. But what those people are is they are not homeless. These are people that are choosing to camp in the city.
There you are. I think everything is there, isn't it? It's
Well, no.
unsightly. It's
Not
ugly,
everything.
and they are there by their own choosing.
Yeah, I don't think there is quite everything there, although some of what isn't there is implicit. For me, the watermark moment, or the watershed moment, I should say, was last week when Gladys Berejiklian said that she found it extremely uncomfortable, was completely uncomfortable,
Yeah.
whatever the
Yeah.
adverb was.
And you often, in fact, hear people saying it's confronting. It's confronting, seeing the spectacle, the sight. And I guess this for me, Waleed, I mean, the real moral problem then that all this raises for me is why is it that lawmakers seem more intent on reducing the visibility of homelessness than with addressing the fact of it?
So I think, go through the motions of the counter argument. I'd have to confess up front it would be half-hearted. But as I hear the counter argument, it's to do not just with the fact that it's an eyesore, although the fact that keeps getting brought up really bothers me, I think, because it indicates a really skewed set of priorities, that the aesthetics of this situation seem to matter more than the reality of the situation, particularly for the homeless people. But, I think what it's about is people going about their daily lives being, and reporting being harassed unduly on their way to work, which was particularly the thing in Sydney, in Martin Place, because that's obviously, it's a major thoroughfare. There are a lot of businesses that work there, not the least of which are media businesses, which I don't know if that has anything to do with it or not. But
well, the Reserve Bank as well, and again, the irony is a bit thick there.
Well, no, indeed, which means that it's actually a perfectly chosen site for protest, if indeed that was the idea of the tent city. And I think there is an element of that in the tent city. But the idea that people should be free to go about their productive lives, free from the harassment that can occur when you have a settlement like this, I understand that as a notion. What I don't understand, though, is the way in which the priority seems to be not on solving the problem in a way that works for everybody, that is, solving the problem of homelessness, but rather in trying to sweep away the cosmetics of homelessness. Now, if I were being generous to the other side of the equation, I might say, well, the fact of the matter is, though, that homelessness is what Durkheim would have referred to as a social fact. It exists, it has always existed, and therefore it is something that is reproducible and impossible to eliminate one way or another. We have never, in the history of our species, it seems, come up with a solution to this problem. And given that that problem, even despite all our best efforts, will continue to exist, it then becomes unacceptable to allow it to exist in such a way as to reduce the amenity for everybody else. So that's probably the highest I could put that argument. That's probably the best Durkheim-inspired version of the argument I could put. But I still can't help but find myself objecting to the terms in which it is put. Because it seems to me, unless I'm misguided here or I've misunderstood something, it seems to show a really shallow disregard for the lives of the people who are the most affected, the most inconvenienced here. And it immediately brought to mind another example that I've long regarded as horrific, but never really noticed anyone identifying or speaking about in public discourse. And that is the example of asylum seekers at the height of boat arrivals to Australia, where one of the lines that would squeak through, it wouldn't dominate, but it would squeak through with enough regularity, at least to pique my interest, was that Australians were sick and tired of seeing people drowned at sea on their television screens at night. They were sick of seeing these stories, as though the great inconvenience, the great imposition of this tragic drama was on us, the television-watching public, rather than on the people whose lives are being extinguished in this way and who find themselves in such a situation as to feel the need to take that risk. And so the concept that it brought to mind for me, from where did this imperative for our comfort derive? From where, like, leaving aside the rights and wrongs of the tent city or the rights and wrongs of asylum seeker policy per se, from where do we derive this imperative that I, as a probably middle-class, well-to-do person watching my television at night, or as a middle-class, gainfully employed person walking through the city to get to my job, from where do I derive this right to comfort and amenity even if that means the airbrushing out of my social existence, my consciousness, of the very real, perhaps intractable problems of people that are far less fortunate. Why does my right to that amenity seem to trump their right to dealing with some kind of structural disadvantage? I find that deeply troubling as a form of moral and political and public reasoning, and I don't know that anyone's really identified that in our public discourse or spoken about it.
Wow, fabulous. So many things to say to that. Let me just try to isolate two. I think one of the really interesting things, Waleed, about this, and here I think a little bit of even cultural or historical archaeology is probably useful here, has been one of the real issues here, I think, has been the destruction of the commons. And the commons isn't just spaces that belong to nobody and therefore spaces that belong to everybody, precisely because they are spaces that are designed for sociality, that are designed for mutual encounter. I think one of the strange things is that it's only in our CBDs, believe it or not, that we now have spaces that are kind of residual commons. Yes, they are presided over by advertisements, and yes, they are subject to one or another form of regulation, but at the same time, these are spaces where encounter really is possible. One of the one of the byproducts, I think, of the destruction of the commons, the privatization of everything, has been the eradication of those places where people that are poor in some areas of life can nonetheless avail themselves of certain relational goods, certain forms of communality. I mean, this has been one of the beautiful things, just watching, listening to the stories, seeing footage of the tent city that's been erected there at Martin Place, has been the forms of civic life, the forms of consociality that have actually been discovered there, and that there's a way in which people have availed themselves of relational goods. And what's interesting there, Waleed, is that one of the things that we've now had come to birth, if you like, within the conditions of late capitalism, has been a form of utter destitution, of utter poverty that was not experienced. I take your Durkheimian point, but this kind of destitution, this kind of poverty did not exist in traditional societies, precisely because even when people were without some forms of goods, they did have access to other forms of goods, other relational goods that not just ameliorated, but that also offset those forms of destitution.
So like an organic, community-driven version of the welfare state.
Absolutely right. That's exactly right. And so I think
before the welfare state could be dreamt up, because of course you would need a vast bureaucracy and a depersonalized kind of social relation in the form of the modern nation state in order for the welfare state to become necessary.
Indeed, indeed. And I think this is where the other idea of the commons is an important one. And this is something I've learned from Pierre Rosanvallon, who says that, in our time, it's almost impossible to deprivatize space. That space has been lost to the public. But what we can try to recover are those locations for genuine encounter with the lived realities of others. In other words, commons as a kind of space for common experience. I think this has been the interesting thing, that in the way that the media, for instance, has reported on homelessness over the last 3 decades, of these forms of urban or destitution, of profound urban destitution, one of the strange things about the way that the media has covered it is that those people that are living rough, those people who are destitute, the way that the media portrays them is almost as inhabitants of another world. It's not just that they're poor, and it's not even just that they've chosen to be there. By their very lifestyle, they have opted out of the social contract. And I think this is where, being in common spaces where we encounter the reality and indeed the humanity of those who live rough, this is going against, I think, part of our cultural grain that runs back for 3 decades at least. There's something kind of assuring in the idea that those who live this way don't have a part in our common life, and therefore they can be just gotten rid of.
Yeah, because the thing about this is that the argument for getting rid of the tent city by force is a commons argument. Yes, it's not the obliteration of common space that undergirds it. It's not, this is my private property and you don't belong here. It's a commons argument. This is common space, and our common space should not look this way. You should not be tainting our common space with something that is this ugly and confronting and unsafe. But that has profound implications, really, that reasoning, for the very notion of protest.
Yes, absolutely.
Because protest occurs in public space in order for it to be effective, usually.
Okay, we're on the upload limit. Back immediately.